we go. Okay, so I'm Sandy Gabe. I'm a past president of AAUW California, and I've done a couple of other things along the way. You may recognize me from some of the other tech sessions that I've done. And today we're here to talk about how to create a survey. Because we are in a webinar, the chat's been disabled. If you have any questions, go to the Q&A section down at the bottom, and you can enter your questions there. And when you enter a question, you can look at just your questions, or you can look at all the questions. And I will be trying to incorporate your questions through the course of the evening. And if I can't, I'll stop periodically and check the Q&A list to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And the questions that were posed during the registration process should be covered in the presentation this evening. And if we get to the end or we hit a section where you think I should have covered it, submit a question and I will do my best to make sure that it's part of the discussion. So tonight, what we're going to cover is where to use a survey or a form. People call them different things, but a survey and a form are kind of the same idea. They're a way to capture information in a standard and consistent way so that you can evaluate the responses and take some action. Sometimes you're the person who's creating the survey, and sometimes you are working with a group who is asking for a survey. So we're going to talk about looking at that request process and trying to understand the request. And then choosing the right tool. We are going to focus on Google Forms tonight. I know there was at least one person who was interested in SurveyMonkey. I'll refer to that briefly, but we're going to really focus on Google Forms tonight. Then we're going to talk about the basics of the survey, how to organize it, how to create it, how to test it, and then how to distribute it. And I have some best practices from my perspective to share with you. You may or may not agree with them, but they're from my experience. And then we're going to get into Google Form details. So I'll talk about the different types of questions, how to customize the look and the feel of the survey, and then the most important part, reporting the results. And then I'm going to do a demo. So you should have in your reminder an hour ago received the link for this document. So hopefully you found that, and you can print it off or look at it and follow along. I'll follow along as best I can until we get to the demo part, and then it's really hard to go back and forth and pretty distracting for me to go back and forth. Okay, so why do you use a survey? And what are some ideas that you could, of areas where you could use a survey? So you can use a survey for things like member satisfaction or program planning, where you're looking for feedback from a group of people. You might use it for satisfaction. So let's say that you had an event or you had a webinar and you're wanting to understand how people interpreted that and whether they have any information to share with you, whether they found it valuable. That's a way to use a survey. You can also use it for elections, and branch elections are coming up. If they're not already underway, the California election is underway, the national election is underway, and we're all using slightly different tools to do that process. In AAUW California, we're actually using SurveyMonkey, and I'll talk about why we're doing that versus Google Forms for that specific part. But for all of our other surveys, we are using Google Forms. Google Forms is actually getting better. So it has a lot of the similar characteristics that SurveyMonkey does, but there are a couple of pretty significant differences. You could also use a survey to do signups for your interest groups, for your meetings, for committee applications, service requests. We have in the past used Google Forms to do some of those pieces. Application forms. So let's say that you want to put your membership form online. Now, maybe it's not the membership form because it's best for folks to go to the national site and do their membership. But once you know that they're a member, you might want to send them a form about their interests, what interest groups they want to participate in, and that sort of information. We've also used it for things like awards programs. So the Branch Activity of the Year Awards, we used a Google form to capture the information that we were looking for on that application. You can also use it for order forms. Let's say that you're still printing directories or you're running a program and you need speakers. We have also used forms for that, and meeting scheduling. So I have just a really basic form that I use for meeting scheduling, and I copy it every time and then I change the dates and I use that to send out. There are other tools. Doodle is a great one for meeting scheduling. So there are lots of different options here. So Peg says she doesn't see a link to the document in the reminder email. Sorry about that. It should be there. It's kind of down near the bottom. It's sometimes hard to find, but yes, it's already posted on the website under branch information, peer groups, and then under the communications peer group. And okay, Louise has the same question. So you can find it on our website. All right, so the process starts when somebody has a great idea to do a survey. And it becomes a very popular thing to do to say, well, we can't move forward until we survey people. And I think that that is a good point. I think we tend to overuse them a little bit and we tend to make them pretty complicated, and we try to describe everything in the kitchen sink in a survey. And so I'm going to encourage you to think smaller than that and to think really condensed in terms of the information you're trying to gather. So the first thing to think about is, who is the audience? Are you trying to get to members? Are you trying to get to specific branch leaders? And that is important for you to understand the language that they might be familiar with, and also to think about whether you have a distribution list that's going to get to those people. The next thing to understand is, what are they, and I'm using they from the perspective of the people who have requested the survey. What are they trying to accomplish? And how are they going to use the information? Because you can have a lot of questions on your survey, and it's really important to understand, when you get the answers to those questions, whether you're going to be able to use those answers to make decisions. So for instance, I am strongly in favor of leaving out questions where we already know the answer. So for instance, other than for trying to set the stage about who's answering, if you already know who has participated in an event, don't ask them that. It just makes you look silly because they signed up if you're keeping attendance. So you want to ask questions that you don't know the answer to, and that you're actually going to do something with the information that you get. You also need to understand, what kind of output do they want? So does the person who submitted this, do they want a spreadsheet? Do they want charts? And then ultimately you have to talk about who's going to pull that information together. The tool creates some data sets and will show that, but in terms of, there's usually an analysis portion that sometimes a survey creator does or sometimes a survey requester does. It's also helpful to know if this is a one-time event or ongoing data collection. So if it's a one-time event, you have a start date and a stop date. And if it's ongoing, you're going to leave it open. And you need to think a little bit differently about who has access to that information over what period of time. The other question is, are there any rules around who receives a survey and how they receive it? And I bring this up from the perspective of our election process. So there are, for California, we have lots of mailing lists and they contain lots of people. But for the election process, we need to make sure that we're only sending that survey out to California members. And our bylaws and policies and procedures dictate how far ahead of the election that information needs to go out and how long the survey stays open. So it's helpful to know whether you have any parameters around that you need to consider. And then it's also helpful to know when whoever's requesting this needs the results. It helps you in your planning from how much time do you have to create the survey. But sometimes people want to leave surveys open for a really long period of time. And my observation is that people either do them or don't do them when they get them. Because if they don't do them when they receive them, they get scrolled down to the bottom of their email list and they'll never find them again. So you either have to send them a reminder, or hopefully if it's a short amount of time, they'll just do the survey at that point in time, especially if it's an easy survey. So I'm going to stop for a moment and look at the questions that are in the Q&A. Let's see if there's any other that I haven't. Oh, thank you. Michelle put the link to the survey in there, so I'm going to put that in the chat. Thank you, Michelle. Chat, where are you? There we go. All right. Thanks, Michelle. So I put that in the chat. Okay. Done. Okay. All right. In terms of which tool to use, as I said, I'm going to focus on Google Forms, but people might be interested in the difference between SurveyMonkey and Google Forms. And actually, Google Forms has gotten a lot better over the years. And that's a great help to everybody here, because some of the, okay, move away. Oh, it won't go away. Some of the characteristics that were in SurveyMonkey have now been replicated in Google Forms. So the big difference is the pricing. So Google Forms is free, and there's no reason to pay for something unless you need to. SurveyMonkey does have a free plan available. It's actually a little bit hard to find on their website. You've got to go digging for it a little bit, but it's pretty limited. You can ask 10 questions and you can get 25 responses for each question. That's not a very large survey. So they have add-on pieces, and the next level up is $39 a month. So it's kind of a difference there. There are more question types and more bells and whistles on the SurveyMonkey one, but I've been able to do 90% of what I need on Google Forms, and it's just gotten better. On both tools, you can collaborate with other people, so you can share the form so that people can look at it, and you can always test it, and I'm going to show you that tonight. So that's really not a difference. The question types, there are definitely more advanced question types on SurveyMonkey, which just means you have to be a little bit more creative on Google Forms when you're trying to create something. And so I haven't found it to be an impediment. SurveyMonkey has more templates than Google Forms. Google Forms has 17 and SurveyMonkey has more than 200 templates. But I almost always start with a previous survey, or I start from scratch. So I haven't found that to be a big differentiator between them. Branching and conditional logic is available on both of them, but on SurveyMonkey, it's available for more question types. And I'm going to show you some of that tonight. Collecting responses. SurveyMonkey definitely has the edge here. In fact, Google Forms has limited their ability to share. It used to be you could embed the form in a website posting or in an email. They've taken that away, and now all you can do is link to the survey, which is okay, but graphically it's not quite as interesting. SurveyMonkey allows you to email it, to link it, and they have functionality that, as we've done for our election, we load up our mailing list and then we send the survey to that mailing list, and we can send reminders to people who haven't voted yet, which is a huge benefit. You can't do that on Google Forms. You can do other workarounds to make sure that that happens, but it's definitely not as easy. And analysis and reporting, SurveyMonkey just has more options, but Google Forms is getting better. They have Google Sheets, and I'm going to show you this. They also have put charts in to their responses. So that's new over, I don't know, the past 6 months or so. All right, so here we get going. So the first step is to organize your survey. And that starts with having your requesters submit questions. It's so much easier if they have thought through what they're trying to accomplish before they give it to you, because it's much more difficult to take a general concept and create a survey, because at the point where you're building it, you want to know that they have thought through all of the questions. It doesn't mean that you're not going to ask them a lot of details, but it's a better starting point than a blank sheet of paper. And when you organize it, you're going to consider how they're going to use the information and determine the best way to organize it. And I'm going to show you an example later where there's a list of questions, but there is an area where branching logic would make the survey a little bit better. So I'm going to share that with you. If you are trying to get consistency across data, if you can codify the information that you're gathering and use things like pick lists for consistency, that's very helpful. So as an example from AAUW California, you know that when you get a survey, it'll ask you what branch you belong to. If I typed in AAUW Mariposa or Mariposa AAUW or Mariposa, those are 3 different answers. And when I go to compare the data, it's going to be very different. And so I'm going to have to do some adjustments. If I have a pick list where somebody can pick off AAUW Mariposa, it means I don't have to do any of that work on the back end. And when you're organizing the survey, it's really important to help your survey taker understand what you're trying to accomplish and why. So it's helpful to have an introductory statement that has all the W's, right? Who, what, why, where, when. So why are you doing the survey? What are you going to do with the data? When is it due? All of those sorts of things. So that's really helpful to have at the beginning, both in the introductory email when you send it out, but also at the top of the form, because sometimes people get disconnected from the email that they received. It's also helpful to have a contact name and email address so that you know who to get back to, and you know whether you have more than one response per survey. It's also helpful to know when it's due. So put that right up front so that they know that it's due on February 1st or whatever, so that they have a target date. And it's also helpful to know who to contact with questions, because sometimes, even though we'll have reviewed it, we'll have shared it with people, we'll have had people look at it, invariably there is some area where everybody thought they understood what was going on, and then you'll have somebody who is a little bit further away from it who asks a very important question, and so it's helpful to know who they should contact. Or maybe it's just not working. So then you're going to create the survey. So it starts, we use a Google Doc that contains the survey questions and the introduction and that sort of thing. And then we give everybody who is participating in it access to it, and then we ask questions and resolve those questions so that by the time we have a back and forth, we have a good set of questions. And it's important to edit, take your time in editing, make sure that the language is okay, make sure that you're using consistency in your language, and spend the time now, because you can do it later, but it's just not as fast. And then I like to get sign off from the person who requested it to say, this is what you asked for. Is this really what you want? And before I get started. And one thing I wanted to note, it's not possible to import questions from Google Docs to a survey without using an add-on tool. So just in its native form, you have to copy and paste from whatever document you're using into the Google form. There's not a way to just load that up. They used to have a way to do, and there is with some scripting, you can use Excel or Sheets to load your data, but they're really getting away. Google Forms is getting away from that. You can copy previous survey questions from one previous survey if you want, but that's about it. And then test. This is the biggest step. You want to enter test data to work out the kinks, and you want to do it from two perspectives. One is, do you get the results that you're looking for? For instance, if you make something required, but it's really an optional question, you want to get that out of the way in the first round of testing. And then you want to look at the way the data comes out and make sure that you can work with it. So you want to get a usable report or a usable spreadsheet out of it. I always send the survey link to the requester and ask them to enter test data so that they get a real sense of what the survey is like. And then we just remove that data at the end before we distribute the survey so that it's not clogged up with test data. And I also like to send them a sample output file so they can see what it's going to look like. Google Forms has made some changes to the process, I don't know, in the last 4 or 5 months. So now you have to publish the form in order to send a link for someone to test it with you. That's new. It used to be that you could just share the development link, but now you have to publish it before you can share that. So that's really different, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. And then you can distribute it. Since Google Forms is only doing a link, the easiest way to do it is to put it into an email and just put the link in there. You could post the link on the website. You could do a button, click here for the survey and embed the link into that button. Or you could put the link in a social media post, depending on how you're distributing it. So it's pretty easy to distribute. All right, here's some best practices. It's really helpful, I already talked about this, have an introduction that outlines how the information is going to be used. Is it confidential? Are you going to share it with the board? Where's that information going to go? And the biggest thing is don't ask complex questions. So a lot of times I'll see questions that really are 2 or 3 questions in one question. And then people don't know how to answer that because it's too complex. So you need to break down the questions into individual questions. And I suggest that yes and no questions seem really easy. Oh, that's a really great way, but you lose some of the context. So sometimes it's better to say how much or how often or how likely instead, so that you get a gradient. Because if you just give a yes or no response, they really don't have very many ways to tell you the strength of their answer. And you need to ask for contact information including a deadline. And it's helpful to customize a thank you response so that they know that you got it and they know that it was AAUW at the point where they send that in. And Louise has a question. Is there an add-on tool you'd recommend we use? Not at this point. I looked for one this afternoon, and there are some that are recommended, but I just haven't used them, so I can't recommend it yet, and I don't know what the idiosyncrasies are with it. So I'm gonna steer clear for that right now. Okay, so other things is if you organize similar information into sections, it's helpful so that people get a context of where they're going. And if you've done that and you have more than one section, a progress bar is really helpful. So they know, am I getting to the end of this? Or if you share with them how long the survey is, that's really helpful. The other thing to consider is to send a PDF version of the survey in your communication so they know what questions to expect. The downside of this is I have had people write on the survey and send it back to me, the sample. And so I put, big like, do not use the survey, do not respond here on the sample. It's easier to make that sample from your Google Doc, which has kind of your flow in it, than to do it from Google Form, because Google Form adds all this space and it's becomes a very long document. It's not very helpful. Most questions should be required. And the reason I say that is they're not required. Why are you asking them? There are some situations where they're not required, and I'll go through a couple of examples of that. But if you don't really need the response, then I would ask, why are you asking the question? All right. And one, we already talked about this, but include a name in the email fields instead of the collect email addresses. This was a question that was posed in the registration process. So under settings, there is a section that says collect email addresses. And if you say collect, that means that the person who is responding has to have a Gmail account. And so I have found it easier to do first name, last name, email address than to use this functionality. The downside is if you want people to be able to go back and adjust their survey, which I don't think is a good idea anyways, but if you did, they have to be logged in to do that. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what it looks like when you are logged in versus not logged in. So you can see what other people are seeing when they are looking at the survey. Okay, so there are a bunch of question types. We're going to go through this. I received a survey from a branch who just had an event and they wanted to do a kind of member satisfaction survey about it. So I'm going to use that as an example because it's always better to look at real life than for me to make up something that is not representative of what's going on. So we use different question types to get different results. So obvious one is a text answer. So that can be short or long, a short answer, a paragraph. You really only want to use that if you can't codify the response or if you don't have any sense of what you're looking for, or you're really looking for kind of a comment. A multiple choice question, and this is what the drop down looks like over here. A multiple choice question gets you one answer. And check boxes get you multiple answers. So if you say, which of these 5 things did you like the best? You're looking for one answer. If you're saying, tell me how many of these 5 things were important to you or resonated with you, then you'd want to use a checkbox because you can do multiple responses there. Drop downs are good for consistency, like I said, branch names. If you are doing a something for your special interest groups, and you want people to sign up, put the special interest groups in there so that they all have the same representation when they answer the survey. A linear scale. Ooh, my speaker has changed. That's interesting. Can you guys still hear me? If you can't hear me, somebody should put in a question. I think it's working. So a linear scale gives you that, you can hear you. Thanks, Michelle. It gives you the opportunity to understand how much or how little people like things. So, and you can add labels. If you do this, I'm going to show you one. If you do this and say, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you like the most? Be consistent if you have other questions that uses scales during the survey, because they all should either be from low to high or high to low, and they should have the same scale so that people don't have to think through that part of it. And there's also a new thing, it's called a rating scale, which is pretty cool. And you can see it says new. I used it for the first time, actually in a survey that I sent you guys. And it allows you to rate, and there are the one I used was the stars. And it was pretty nice. And then there are a couple of grid options. Multiple choice, which gives you one answer, and a checkbox, which gives you multiple choices per topic. And I'm actually going to show those to you, but it allows you to put something on the left-hand side and then a couple of rows or columns, and then you can choose. And then obvious ones are date and time. So Pat asks, is there a way to limit the number of checkbox answers, like top 3? Yes, you can. And if I don't say that when we're going through that section, ask me again. It's also possible to customize the look of the survey. So, oops, I see a typo. Dang. Dawn, I didn't have you review this, so I missed this one. Customize the theme to change the fonts of the headers, questions, and text. It comes out pretty basic when you first start, but you can make it look a lot different by changing the fonts. You can also make it different by changing the header. So a header you can create it in Canva. And when you do that, you do a custom form, and you'll do it 1600 pixels wide by 400 pixels tall, and then it will fit and it will work just great. And then that image becomes the color, can become, if you wanted to, can become the color palette for the form. So you'll get to see that also. I did one for this example. And then reviewing the results. I'm just going to go through a couple more pages and then we're actually going to do one, and it may make more sense. So when you review the results, there's a tab called responses, and you can look at a bunch of different stuff. So you can look at the responses by question. You can look at the responses by individual. So you could see, what did Sandy Gabe say for all of the answers, or for this question, what were the responses? You can download a CSV file, which is like an Excel file, but it just has one tab. You can download that right from here. You can print all the responses, and so you could print them to your printer. You can also, when you go to print, instead of using your printer, you can say print to PDF, and then you'll get a PDF of that. And sometimes when we're doing things like applications, I'll print off all the responses to a PDF and then send those all out to a group. You can delete all the responses very easily. So if you've had a bunch of people going in there playing around and trying it, then you can delete all the responses at once. You can also delete them individually. And then the other one that is probably one that I use the most is linking to Sheets. So if you say link to Sheets, it will create a spreadsheet based on the responses. And every time somebody answers a question or answers a survey, it adds to the spreadsheet. So that's pretty cool. Very easy. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. And I am going to open, let's see if this works. Okay, so here is the survey content that I received. And I want to walk through this and talk about it before we get actually into the survey. And Julie submitted this. I don't know if Julie is on or not. Let's see if Julie's on. Yes, Julie, thank you for sending this. We didn't have a chance to talk because she sent it yesterday, so I haven't had a chance to ask her some questions, which I'm going to pose here that I would do if we were working together. So she has an introduction. That's fantastic. And she talks about the event that was happening and information about the event and please respond. She says that responses are going to be confidential. So the one question I would ask her is when does she want her responses by? And then she starts out with really basic. Did you attend the home tour or not? Yes or no? And if you did, and if you didn't. So if you did, there are some questions. Were you a docent? Did you purchase a ticket? If you didn't, why not? And then if you attended, how would you describe your experience? So one of the things when you were doing the survey is people might ask the questions in this order, but when I look at it, I say, okay, we're probably going to want to put the attended pieces together so that I could say, if you said yes, I'm going to ask you the two questions about if you were there. And if you said no, then I'm going to branch that off into a different question. So it's okay to adjust and to move things around so that the survey flows in a way that is good for the user. And then she's gonna want to know from everybody, how did you receive information about the tour? And so there are several options here. And then she's starting to get into, should the branch hold a tour next year? I think yes, if it's the 50th tour in 2026, but that's just my opinion. So Julie, I hope everybody says yes. And then again, you have sort of a branching logic. If no, how should the branch raise scholarship funds? And I'm going to actually put this into a survey tool so you can see it in a couple of minutes. If you held it, would you buy a ticket? Would you participate in the organizing committee? And there's some yes, no questions here. And then a couple of text, like comment areas. What could be done to make the tour less time consuming? What could be improved? So this is one where I might suggest that if you have some things that you are looking for, that you might want to put a pick list here of things to choose from, and then an other box for people to share with you, especially if you've had any conversations and you kind of know what some of the feedback is. And then here are some other options of what could we do for fundraisers next year? Would you be willing to just donate something instead of doing a fundraiser? And if so, how much? And then she's looking for, what does the tour mean to you? So looking for some content here that I could say could be used in marketing, could be used with the board to say how important this event is. And then she has a thank you and reiterates again what's going to be happening with the content. All right, so here we go. So the first thing, I actually started to build this because I did. So the first thing I did is I went to Canva and I made a header here. So I went to Canva, I used a 1600 by 400 and I just made a simple banner. And it didn't pick very good colors. These were the colors it picked and I didn't like any of those colors. I don't know why it came out with these colors. I think from the color on the hand is where these came from. So I got to this part by going here, customize theme. I'm going to close this. So customize theme, pops this box open, and then I can change the font here. So I like something a little bit more bold for these pieces here. And you can see it changed this right here. That's the header. It didn't change any of the questions or any of the text. The header and the questions and the text are the same. And then let's play around with this a little bit and let's do Barlow for the question. So that's this part here. And let's make it a little bit bigger. So you see how that increased the size. I'm just going to leave the text the same way. And then down here, I actually added a color because I didn't like any of these. So if you go plus here, you could add AAUW colors here if you wanted, or generally your picture is more interesting than mine. I just did this in a couple of minutes, so it's not very complex. So you could pick a color here, you can put the hex number in, which is on the list of AAUW colors that you can get off of the national site. All right, so that's my theme. So I have it set up now. I've got a header. I've changed a little bit of this, and then I'm just going to copy things over. So in this section here, I just copied over this part here. I copied it in here, and I added a little bit of spacing so that it was easier to read. And I added, please respond to the following questions by XXX date. All responses are confidential. That was in the top. And I just added this piece here because you want that right up front so that people know, oh, I have a day, I have 10 days, I have a month. And again, I wouldn't give people more than 1 to 2 weeks because they'll forget about it and then you won't get responses. All right, so the next question was, did you attend the home tour? Yes or no? Karen, where am I now? Are you not able to see the form? I'm not on the handout. I'm looking at the questions that were submitted, which I did not send to you. We're just doing this live. Okay, so did you attend the home tour? Yes or no? And so I'm going to do that here and I'm going to say, did you attend the home tour? And then I did a multiple choice and I said yes or no. And when you do, it's kind of smart. Sometimes it picks up and it will say yes, no, maybe. And you can say add all of them or add one, and it'll prompt you if you want to add an other. Now, remember I said that there were some questions that were related to the yes and some questions that were related to the no. So I'll come back here, but what I did was I created a section called I attended, and I moved the 2 questions that were about attending, if you said yes, here. So the first question was, if you did attend, were you a docent? Did you purchase a ticket? And did you bring family and friends? And I did adjust these questions a little bit so that they're all phrased the same way so that it reads a little bit differently. So I said, thank you for attending. Tell us about your participation. So this is an area where, if you have some license with whoever's asked you to create the survey, this is kind of a value add to help create the survey to be a little bit more readable. The questions are good, but sometimes when you lay it out, you'll see, oh, if I asked it slightly differently, it'll come out better. So I said I was a docent, so tell us about your participation. And then I just changed these to active phrases, which is part of the AAUW editing guidelines, is that we use active phrases. So I changed these. I was a docent at one of the homes or sites. I purchased a ticket. I bought family and friends. So I'm assuming from what I saw in here that these are mutually exclusive. So you're going to do one or the other. So you're not going to choose all 3 of them. You either were a docent or you purchased a ticket individually. I added individually, or you brought family and friends out of it. If that's not correct, we can change that. But that's the way that I interpreted the question. And then there was a no question, but I'm going to skip that now. And there was another, if you attended, which of the following best describes your experience? So this suggests that there's only one answer. I think that when I was looking at it, and I have the benefit of looking at it for the first time and thinking if I were going to answer this, I might have had a great day and I might have thought it was good value for the money. So I might have two. So I created this as a checkbox. And so the checkbox allows me to choose more than one. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like. All right, so hang on a minute. Okay, so, and I do this a lot. I'll create something and then I'll go look at it and say, oh, well, that doesn't look very good. That looks ugly. I'm gonna change that, or the question is not helpful. So the one, sorry, the UPS is here. Somebody has asked about this section here. This always gets people. I'm logged in as site admin. And so it comes up here and it asks me if I want to use a different account. I'm just ignoring this. If I did this and I didn't have an account, I'm going in incognito, which is our way of seeing what it looks like to somebody from the outside. Oops. Okay, well, that's not true. So I have to go back and figure out why that is, but you should be able to go in without having to do this. So here's the feedback. Did you attend the home tour? Yes or no? So I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to go next, and it's going to ask me the two questions. And so you can see I can only choose one of these answers because it's multiple choice. I get one choice here, one choice, not more than one choice. This one, which of the following best describes your experience? I probably would reword this a little bit, but I added check all that to all that apply. So I can say these three things were important to me or I liked. And then I'm going to, if I go next, it's going to take me past the no question. Okay, because I didn't answer no. But I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to say no. And if I say no, it asks me what prevented you from attending. Check all that apply. And then if I say next, it's not going to go to the yes questions. It's going to go on past that. So let me just stop and show you that here. So this was a yes question. Where's my little sorry. This is a yes question. And this is a yes question. So I put those two together in one section. I will share what it looks like in Sheets at the end, Pat. Yes, I will. But not yet. And this is a no question. So I put this one separate. And so that I could put, did you attend? Yes. If you did, these two questions. If you say no, you go to this one. So do you see how that works? So let me go back here. So I created the first question, and then I created what's called a section. And I did that by, there's a little thing here called section, add a section. And I put the I attended questions in that section. And you get to here, it's called branching logic. These are options of things you can do. You can go to a section based on an answer. So if I said yes, I'm going to continue to the next section. If I said no, I'm going to go to section 3, which is my I was unable to attend section. Okay, so that's how Chrissy, that's how you do the differentiated flow, is based on here. So if I say yes, I'm going to go to this section, which is about the yes questions. And if I say no, I'm going to go to section 3, which is here, section 3. And it's I was unable to attend, what prevented you from attending. So it makes a path there, two different paths there. The one thing you have to do on the first one where the yeses are is you don't want it to go to the next section because it's going to ask the no questions. So you're going to have it go to the following section, which is section 4. And there are only 4 sections here. So section 1 is your first question. Did you attend? And then section 2 is I attended and those questions. And section 3 is I was unable to attend. And then everybody goes to section 4 because it's for everybody. And you can take out the titles. You don't have to have the titles there. So that's kind of a big concept. The other things on here are, this is what you use to make it required. So you definitely want to know here whether they attended or not. That seems like a pretty obvious thing. You either did or you didn't. And then the other options when I do these 3 dots is that you have description. So if I do description, you can add a comment here. Like I did here, check all that apply. So that's an option, the description. And then I have never used shuffle order option. I'm sure there are situations where you are looking at trying to randomize the questions for some sort of a test process, but generally speaking, I want the flow to be in the way that I have designed it. So I don't ever use this shuffle option order. Now, let's say that you wanted to move these sections around. You can collapse this section here. So this is section 2, and you can just drag and drop these different sections. So you can move the section by saying, I want to move it before or after another section. Or I don't really need this section. I wish I had never done that. And you can merge it with the one above. So you've got lots of options, but the basic concept that I want you to take away is that if you have a yes, no, and you want to branch, you create a section, which is this thing here, for each of your choices. And then based on whatever they answered here, you send them to the appropriate section. Okay. I'm going to pause for a second and check and see if folks have questions about that. How do you set up the differentiated flow? I just answered that. Got it. Okay. Let's see. It looks like creating a simple flow chart might help in planning. Yes, Peg, it does help to do that. And it helps a lot. And sometimes your experience is your best option. So you'll try it and say, well, that didn't work. I've got to redo this thing. But yes, if you can flow it out, if you have that option, I just do it on paper. It's definitely helpful. Okay, so that's the most complicated thing in this survey. The rest of it is, I just want to share a couple of different kinds of questions. So I'm going to go back to the survey and said, how did you receive information about the tour? And to me, this looked like I could have heard it from an email. I could have gotten it from a newsletter or a website. I put all of those options here. Somebody had asked if you can limit, oops, I'm in the wrong one. If you can limit here, and it's called response validation. And you can say, I want to have at least 1 response, or I want to have at most 1 response or 2 responses, or I want exactly. So depending on what you're trying to do, you can limit the responses in this area. So you can say, tell me your top 3 choices. And then you can only get 3 and they'll get an error message if they try to do more than that. All right, Pat, I hope that answers your question. So then we got into, should the branch hold a final 50th tour in 26 or 27? I said yes or no. And since there are not a lot of questions, I did not do branching logic, but you could do branching logic here. And you could say, if yes, then go down here. And if no, answer this one question. So that you can certainly do that. But if it's a really simple thing, then I probably would just leave it like this. The one thing to remember is if you go that route and you have made this a required field, they'll have to answer this question. So this becomes a non-required field here. Otherwise, people won't be able to get by it if they didn't have anything to say here. And people will answer and say, I don't, they'll give you an answer because they have to, because they can't go on. But it sometimes stops people from proceeding. All right, if held, would you buy a ticket? So that was one of the questions. The other way to look at this is to do something like, how likely, if held, how likely would be, this is not good English, but how likely would it be to buy a ticket? So you can use something like this, which is a scale. And when it's a linear scale. So these are my choices here. I did a linear scale, and you can choose from 1 is the least or up to 10. You can't go more than 10. And you really want to do 3 to 5. When you get into these sorts of granulations where it's 7 and 8, it's really hard to differentiate. My 6 is your 4. But if you have 1 to 3, and it's unlikely or very likely, you can put the parameters here for what the lower end looks like and what the upper end looks like. So if we look at this, we get here, and so this unlikely, very likely gives you the scale. And like I said, if you're going to use scales throughout your survey, it's really helpful if you keep the same scale and, if possible, the same characteristics here, so that people get used to it and they don't have to think about it. I have seen some where they'll start out, how likely is it that you'd buy a ticket? And likely is over here, and then the next question is likely is over here, and that's just confusing because you don't really know if they answered correctly or not. All right, so the next section was, would you be willing to help? And so I wanted to show, you could do each of these individually, and you could make this a section, and you could have a question that says, be a member of an organizing committee, yes or no. The one benefit to doing that is if you wanted feedback on each of these questions. So you wanted to have a comment section on this question. But otherwise, one option is, how are you willing to support the event? Is to do what's called, is to do this one here, which is a multiple choice grid. And so you put your questions on the left-hand side, and then your columns, yes or no, here. And you could say yes, no, maybe, as an example. And then when you look at it, I have to refresh it in order to get there. So you see yes, no, maybe came up. So now this is set up so that you are requiring 1 response per line, but you can't do 2. You see what happens? Is it takes away the other one, because this is a multiple choice. And remember, multiple choice can only have 1 answer. So you can't do multiples, even though it's called multiple choice. The other question that was on here was, Unable to participate, I put that as a question. And then in other text box, I actually created that as a new question and said, how else are you willing to participate? So sometimes you can break things apart so that they actually become two questions, so that you're getting the answer specifically to a very specific question. And then we get into these text box ones, which are what could be done to make the tour less time consuming and what could be improved upon. And those just had text boxes. So I just made them text boxes, and you just put your answer here and here. These are required. You might consider whether you want them to be required or not, because maybe I don't have any feedback. And if I don't have any feedback, I can type no response or no feedback. But this is an area where you might consider not making it required. The next section was to raise scholarship funds and allow the creation of fundraisers with less time. Are you interested in supporting events such as, and then there's a list of other events. So I turned that into to raise scholarship funds. I did the yes, no thing here again. So this is a multiple choice grid. And I did the items here and then the yes, no here. So it looks like this. So it does require them to make a decision on each line. And then the next question was, do you have any fundraiser, any other ideas? I made that into a separate question so that you could have a text box. And then there's a question about raising money. Would you be willing to contribute? And that's a pretty easy one. I just made it a multiple choice. So you're going to choose one or more of those, and there was an other option as well. And then the last question was, describe what the tour means to you. So that is just a text box. A couple of other things that you can do to fancy this up is you could, you might notice at the top that you have a spot for an image. And so let's see, you could put an image here. Thank you for attending. Tell us about your participation. So if I say add an image, then I can browse, and let's say that I'm going to use one of these just to show you what it looks like. You can only use one image here. And if I look at it now, let's refresh it. You have to go through the questions again. Where did I put it? I don't remember where I put it. Did I lie? Where did I put it? All right, let me go back here. I attended. All right. Oh, because I said no here, so I have to say yes. Okay, so it puts an image in here. So you can do that as well. So that's one way to fancy it up. Let's see, what else? So the survey then is ready to go. Let me talk a little bit about these things up here. You have to publish the survey in order to share the link so that other people can take the survey. And I don't worry about whether anybody is going to find it before I really want people to use it. People have a hard enough time finding the stuff you send to them. I'm not worried that they're going to find something that we don't really want them to see yet. This piece here is sharing it. So if I wanted to send it to Sandy Gabe, I can say, do I want them to be a responder or do I want them to be an editor? And this is when it used to be called collaboration, but they've changed it. So now it's here, and then I added you to collab, ULABRIT, on the survey. So now my Sandy Gabe person could look at it. I'm going to share it. Okay. So I'm logged in as site admin, but now me as an individual could get in here and look at it. So that's how you share it. These are, redo and undo. This is the preview, so you can look at it. But I like to actually go in and monkey around with it and see if it's responding the way that I wanted it to respond. This is that customized theme piece. So this is where we change the header font, the question font, where we added the image at the top. That's where we did this. And it does the same thing. You can choose a picture here, or you can upload one. And I created one and then I uploaded it there. So I'm going to leave that alone. And then there are add-ons. And at California, we use an email notification one for Google Forms so that when we get a form response in, I can route it to different people. So for instance, for committee applications, if I know what committee they have chosen, I can route it to the director for that choice. So that's a forms notification. This is the one that I use. That one I can stand behind. So let's talk about this piece here. So this is the question. That's where we are. This is the response tab. Now I filled out one of these before the meeting. And so this is a summary. So it's saying that, did you attend the home tour? 100% of the people said yes, but we only have one response. But it allows you to copy the chart. And this is new. I don't know, at least in the last year. You didn't used to have this. So if you wanted to make a presentation, you can now copy the chart and copy that into your presentation. Here's thank you for attending. Tell us about your participation. These were the choices that I made. Which of the following best describes your experience? So it's going to give you the percentages there. But I might want to know just by question. So this is question 2. And it will tell me I had one response on that. It's hard with just one response to see much of the content. Or you can look at the individual response. And what I did not add in here that Julie, you should add if you're still here is who I am, name, first name, last name, email address. That was missing. I would definitely add that there so you know who's responded. These parts here are what we went over about what you can do. So I'm going to get email notifications for new responses logged in to site admin, not to Sandy Gabe, but to the person who created the form. That's why the add-on is helpful. You can select a destination for the responses. I have this organized in a folder on Google Drive, and it's going to go in the same folder that the form is in, but I could send it someplace else. I can download the responses on a CSV. So just a spreadsheet without having to do the link to spreadsheet. I can print out the responses. So if I wanted to print, as I said, this is how ugly it is when it's that way. But I could save it as a PDF, and then it's going to make a PDF file so I could route that to people. So that's an option. And then what was the last one? Oh, delete all the responses. So before I sent this out, I would delete all the responses. But you want to link it to the spreadsheet. And so I'm going to create a new spreadsheet with it will default to the name of the form that you've created. And you can change it, but I'm going to create it. And then it's going to pop open the spreadsheet. Okay. So when you're looking at this, this is a place to take a look before you finalize your survey, because depending on the question type that you use, sometimes you have to do a little bit of data massage at the end in order to see your responses. So some of these are pretty easy because it's a direct question, but there are some of these that are like here. How are you willing to support the event? So I am willing to participate, yes or no. Be a member of an organizing committee. So these will have all the answers in it, but it has the question, the overall question at the very beginning. And then the specific option that was chosen here, which is actually better than it used to be. It used to be they'd all come together and you'd have to separate them out. So at least now you can say, oh, I want to know how many people are willing to participate, and you can see the answers there. So it just becomes a big spreadsheet. Now you can add to the spreadsheet. We use this for things like scheduling fund presentations. So we get all of our answers from fund, and then we can add a couple of columns here. Actually, you can add them anywhere, but you can say, date contacted, date scheduled, who is scheduled. So you can add these to the end of the spreadsheet. If you make a lot of changes to this document, let's say that you decided that you want to add some more questions in here, but you already linked it to the spreadsheet, your questions that you added are going to go to the end of the spreadsheet, and that's really annoying. So if that happens, you say unlink form, and so I want to unlink it. And then I add what I want to do, or I've already done it, and then I link it again. So you get that if you have sort of finalized your form and you've linked it to a spreadsheet, and then you go and add questions in the middle of it, those questions are going to go to the end of the spreadsheet unless you unlink the sheet and relink it. So you're just kind of saying the data doesn't go away. You're just saying, okay, I added questions, now put them in the right order. So that's helpful to know, especially if you've linked it to a spreadsheet and then you start moving these around. It's kind of annoying when you go to look at the spreadsheet and they're not in the right order. Okay. So I'm going to take a pause. We've got 15 minutes left, and I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm quite sure I didn't answer all of your questions. Going once, going twice. Can you show the star rating option? Oh, yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Thought I did that. I had intended to. Let's do this one. We'll make this a star. So go back to the questions and say, well, let's do how likely are you to buy a ticket? Or how much did you like the event? Something like that. If I go to do a star option, a rating, I can say, did I give it 5 stars or 3 stars or 2 stars? It's that easy. You can then also change this to like, how much did you love it? So if we look at that now, I've got to go out here, go to preview. Whenever you do this, you have to answer the questions. So here it is. So I would definitely put a little clue here as to what you're looking for, but how much did I love it? I loved it a lot. I loved it a whole lot. You don't you don't have the option of putting the scale on either side, but it's kind of self-explanatory. Thanks, Michelle, for reminding me about that. Do you have a previous spreadsheet with more results to show us the graphic output? Well, let's see. Could I? Let me see. Oops. Hold on. Nope, 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 no, that's not the one I wanted. Let me do this one. Julie asked, what's the maximum number of questions you could ask? You should ask. Form follows function. So I think people should be able to fill it out in a few minutes. If people start rolling their eyes, and the people who test it for you should tell you that, like, it was way too long. I didn't even want to finish it. So then you know you need to cut it down a little bit. All right. So Peg, I gotta go do a little bit of dig in here. Let's see. Okay, here's a topic survey. Okay, so this is one I sent you guys out after I kept calling the zebra a giraffe last time. So here are the responses. So in summary, these are all the people that responded. First name, last names. This is the branches they were from. And if I wanted to copy this chart, I go copy chart, and then let me go to the survey, and let me just open a new page. And I did paste. Oh, you're not gonna paste. Link to form, paste unlinked. So it literally copies the chart that you have there. That's how that works. Where did it go? Where did it go? Sorry, too many windows open. Here we go. If you wanted to look at the spreadsheet, so first names, last names, these are the people who responded, what their position was. So in the position, I asked, choose all that apply. So they're all listed here. And then it was a rating scale on how interested are you in these different topics. And then which topics, if you have your own. And so this is what the spreadsheet looks like. Does that help, Peg? If not, send it in again. Some are circle charts, some are bar charts. I don't know if you have control over that or not here. I think they choose what they think is the appropriate, because it's not a sum of a whole. So these are actually how many people answered 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So it is based on the type of question that has been asked, but you can't change it here. You could do that in Excel or in Sheets. You could redo the data and do the charts yourself. Okay. All right. So I should survey you. Any other questions? And Lisa, Lisa asked a question about how do we include the video in the space for Zoom? It's a feature of Zoom webinar. I don't know if it's on Zoom meetings or not. Probably Julica knows that. But it's just a feature as part of that tool. All right, well, I'm gonna stop sharing. And share. No, I don't want a new share. I want to stop sharing. Okay, and I'm going to turn the recording off.